The basic picture is this. In 2006, our government, it was then President Bush, he was in that period, you might recall, what was called democracy promotion. And one of the instances of democracy promotion was he told the Palestinians to hold an election in the West Bank and Gaza. They hold an election, Hamas wins the election. Okay? Hamas didn't want to participate, ended up being convinced to participate, put up a party, and it won the election. Jimmy Carter, who you know, former president, he monitored the election, and he said, completely honest and fair election. I'm quoting him word for word. Hamas comes to power. What's the first thing the United States does? What is the first thing Israel does? They impose sanctions on Gaza, brutal economic sanctions. First of all, before I get to those sanctions and rush to the present, your audience has to know, or should know, and would probably want to know, what is Gaza? Gaza is 25 miles long. For those in your audience who are joggers or runners, Gaza's its length is less than a marathon. Its width is 5 miles. I jog 5 miles every day. It's not a long distance. Gaza is 5 miles by 25 miles. It's among the most densely populated places on God's earth, more populated than Tokyo. 70% of the people of Gaza, 70%, are refugees. They were expelled from Israel in 1948, and they and their descendants ended up in Gaza. 50% are children. That's Gaza, among the most densely populated places on God's earth, a tiny parcel of land overwhelmingly composed of refugees and their descendants and children. That's Gaza. So a brutal blockade is imposed on Gaza in 2006. What does that blockade look like? Or what does it mean? It means nobody can go into Gaza and nobody can leave Gaza, with the rarest of exceptions. Israel controls the exit and the entry to Gaza. Israel controls the airspace. Israel controls the waterways. Israel controls everything, what goes in. There was a period when Israel denied chocolate, as in bonbons. It's very serious, couldn't go into Gaza. Wouldn't allow baby chicks to go into Gaza. It wouldn't allow potato chips to go into Gaza. There was a period when Israel had an explicit policy of giving Gazans, it was calculated, a starvation plus diet, a diet that just hovered above starvation. It controls everything in Gaza. There are people with severe medical conditions who want to go to better hospitals in, say, Jordan. They cannot leave. They cannot leave. Gaza is half the population, suffers what international humanitarian organizations call, quote, severe food insecurity, which is to say half the population of Gaza never felt what it was like to have a full stomach. Half the population of Gaza is unemployed. Among youth, it's 70%, highest unemployment rate of any area in the world. Now, that's the facts, the discrete, the separate facts. One of the senior officials, I would like your audience to listen, planted in your mind, one of Israel's senior security officials, Giora Eiland, E-I-L-A-N-D, still a very prominent figure in the Israeli security establishment. In 2004, before the blockade, he described Gaza as, quote, a huge concentration camp. That didn't come from some Hamas propaganda leaflet. That was and is a senior official in Israel's security establishment. In March 2004, he described Gaza as a huge concentration camp. Now, I want to bring it up to the present. Number one, it's not just a concentration camp, it's a killing field. Because every few years, as I've already said, Israel goes in and mows the lawn in Gaza, kills in Operation Cast Lead 1,400 people, Operation Protective Edge 2,200 people, and that's leaving aside a slew of other operations. So, what's the bottom line to bring us up to the present? The bottom line is, you know, those young folks who crashed the gates of Gaza on October 7th, those young men, probably down to the last, had been born into that concentration camp. All they had to do, those young men, for 20 years was to pace the perimeter of Gaza. No jobs, no food, no past, no present, no future. That's Gaza. I have never said atrocities weren't committed. By all evidence, atrocities were committed. Were there beheadings? At this point, doubtful, but I won't say for certain. Were there rapes? At this point, doubtful, but I won't say for certain. Were there atrocities? At this point, yes. I have a credo in life: never quarrel with facts. Never quarrel with facts. That's my credo. I made some errors in previous interviews. People send me emails. They said, "You're in error there." Of course, nobody likes to have to admit an error, but I had to fight my own ego and say, "You're correct. Thank you. I won't make that same error in the future." So I'm not going to quarrel with the facts. Israel has made not one, not two, not 10, not 20, in its various leadership capacities, genocidal statements in the last 7 weeks. That's number one. Okay? I have two friends, Yaniv Kogan and Jamie Stern Weiner. They compiled this list of pages and pages of statements by the Israeli government the past 7 weeks, which are genocidal in content and in intent and in result. Number two, I have to ask you the question, and I'm willing to hear you out, okay? If you have a declared policy, no food, water, fuel, electricity, and part of the purpose of the ceasefire is to allow fuel to come in. If the people in Washington do not support the access of the people of Gaza, they oppose the access of people in Gaza to food, water, fuel, and electricity. How would you describe that policy? They're against the ceasefire. They're against the humanitarian pause. So you're asking me a question about whether in each of their minds they fantasized about the extermination of every person in Gaza, to which I say I can't read their mind. What I can say is they attended a rally in Washington which supported the government's policy of denying food, electricity, fuel, and water to the people of Gaza. That, again, in my mind, but you can disagree with me, is not a complicated question. That is a very rational decision to support genocide. That's a rational decision to support genocide. Well, there are two answers to that. Number one, that's not Israel's declared policy. Its declared policy is to wipe out or expel the population of Gaza. Israel has repeatedly said, we do not accept the distinction between the civilian population and Hamas. They have repeatedly said, we are going to flatten everything in Gaza and turn it into a tent city. You can find numerous statements So it's not true that the goal now is to return the hostages. But for argument's sake, let's agree that is the goal. I'm all for freeing the hostages. However, all the hostages, the 240 Israelis being held hostage and the 2.3 million people of Gaza who have been held hostage for 20 years. Yes, free the hostages, free all the hostages. By international law, that blockade of Gaza is a crime against humanity. Under international law, there are three kinds of crimes. One, you of course know, war crimes. And then there's a second kind called crimes against humanity. And then the third crime, which you of course know, genocide. What's happening now in Gaza hovers between a crime against humanity and a genocide.